first of all, who we are. I will give the floor to everybody. You know already David Garland, Professor David Garland from Carnegie Mellon University. One of the fathers of the modern software architectures. Is a good title. Yeah. Okay. Richard Solly, Dr. Richard Solly is OMG. This is not oh my god, Object Management Group. It's a good joke. And that's the organization which takes care about the modern industrial standards and a lot of other things. And Slava Muchnik, who is now in UK, the largest telecom operator, mobile, but before that working a lot on a parallel and other specific type of computing. And my name is George Sharkov. I'm a director of European Software Institute, the Center for Eastern Europe in Sofia, Bulgaria. 2 years ago, we spoke here on a panel about the peopleware and how to do the best with our developers. And today we are going to talk about the security. And first of all, can we, okay, about the title. The title, do you remember this article of Mark Andreessen, the father of Mosaic or Netscape, 2011 in Wall Street Journal? It was Software is Eating the World. So he was saying or claiming how software is changing our life, taking our business away sometimes. And his examples were about how Amazon or Netflix or Pandora, they changed the retail, music, video, and others. So we have much modern examples how software is taking away the business from the traditional way we do it, how our life depends on that. And I choose this title because yeah, okay, I get it, control here. Because of this digital dependency we live in. So you know the famous S-curve, where you have any new technology, first the researchers, they push to the market, and then markets start pulling. So the tipping point, which is just over there, we don't see it, okay, in the middle, is where we start depend on this. So on this technology, whatever it is. And if we start talking about the safety or how secure this technology is, we depend on, that's usually too late. So the security function always goes behind. And security in more general terms. So it's about also skills, competencies, the usability, and everything else. So if we start thinking about the software security today, I believe it's too late. So we should have started yesterday. And the previous talk, what David was talking about, the architectures, actually it's in that direction. So hopefully some things are there. So we want to have this security function a bit before the tipping point or before our full dependency. And this is usually what we call like prevention or something more general than security, because security usually is like a crime, prevention against crime. So we want to talk to be more resilient against this dependency. And this is the more general term. Okay, that's why I wanted to start this talk today about the more general term. So if we depend on this software, and we are going to depend more, or we depend on our digital systems in our digital life, how to make ourselves safer. And one of the first common question we put for the discussion was for the panel, and also take this opportunity to give some additional facts about your work as well, is first of all what we want to achieve. What is the customer perspective? Is there 100% no defect, zero defect software? Is there a perfect software actually? And we used to have this дурако-устойчивое system, foolproof systems. So is there such thing? Or we require a lot from our customers as well on the security side. What was said some time before, you can make your systems as secure that nobody could use them. Okay. Who wants to?
I'm always willing to start. Yes, of course, there's a completely fault-free system. That's the system that exits as soon as you start it. Other than that, no. The answer is no. A little more background that I think will be relevant than George's brief introduction. I not only run the Object Management Group, which manages a number of standards from middleware to modeling, like the language, the UML language, and the CWM and SysML languages and so forth, but also standards in about 24 vertical markets. I think more relevant to this panel is I'm also executive director of the Industrial Internet Consortium, which in March of this year brought together the CEOs of IBM, Intel, Cisco, AT&T, and General Electric, and today about 90 companies to develop Internet of Things solutions for industrial problems. And I think this is a perfect point to bring up the discussion of if the internet is going to be everywhere, if software is going to be everywhere, and it almost is today, then I think perhaps quality of software is going to be more important than it is today. And security is just one of those metrics of quality. If every actuator and every sensor around us is going to be connected to something that speaks an internet protocol, if not the internet, there's tremendous opportunities for the kind of failures that David was just talking about to affect our everyday lives, whether the cars move, whether the bridges stay open, whether the laundry machine works in the morning. So the immediate answer to George's question, the serious answer is no, there are no systems with no problems, and that's why it's important to be able to ameliorate those problems, to be able to figure out what they are and correct them automatically when possible. That's a good entry for you.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things I think that's really critical is that you understand how security relates to the other quality dimensions that you care about. And that this becomes an engineering choice. I think often we ignore the fact that there are trade-offs involved, that if you're going to get more security, it's going to cost you more, or it's going to impact performance. And so the answer often has to be done in the context of an analysis that says how much does it matter to us. Of course, we deal with this all the time. If you think about our physical security, how much do you invest in the security of your home? Well, it probably depends on where you live, for example. It depends on how likely people might be to break into your house. It depends on how much it's going to cost you. And so it becomes an engineering choice that's really critical. And so even if we could, which we can't, but even if we could approximate complete security, chances are from a business perspective, we wouldn't design it that way anyway. Because it would cost too much, or it would impact all the other business qualities. So I think the question is not, how secure can you be, but what's the right amount of security for the context that you work in?
Isn't that actually part of I mean, I see this as a much more general issue, which is the move of software development to an engineering methodology. I love the writings of this bridge engineer from North Carolina, whose name I'm always forgetting, but his best book ever is To Engineer is Human. He points out, help me with the name here. Petrosky, thank you, Henry Petrosky, which points out that in every engineering methodology you make choices about all sorts of quality dimensions, and he also makes the very important point that we only learn from failure, not from success. If the bridge stands, it doesn't mean the design is good, but if it falls, then we know that there's something wrong with the location of the bridge, the construction of the bridge, or the materials used in the bridge, and the same is true for software. So this all ties into a move to engineering discipline, which is finally starting to show up in software development.
I'd like to expand a little bit on the point made by David about security being only one of the aspects, and there are always trade-offs involved. And yes, the considerations of cost, convenience, performance, and security, they all pull in different directions, and you have to compromise. But what makes matters more difficult is that security considerations in this context are notoriously difficult to deal with numerically and scientifically, because you have all the time to deal with low probability, high impact events. So a catastrophic security failure may be very unlikely, but it's going to be hugely costly. And conventional approaches to analyzing the potential impact and the cost-benefit balance in these things based, for example, on what is the expected impact, they may well fail when you deal with very low probability events. And instead, because in some cases you come across things that you may face in notorious paradoxes of the theory of probability, where you end up with something where the expectation may be infinite, because ensemble average is not the same as time average, and the ergodicity property is not there. So instead, you have to apply a more common sense approach, and this may even work better when you have to deal with business people making decisions and you have to justify the spend on security. You just point out that certain things are possible and you want to avoid them, and you try to apply common sense, or perhaps compare the cost of security to the cost of other things. For example, in a development project, if our spend on enforcing and ensuring security is not much more, or hopefully even less than our spend on functional testing, then we're probably doing all right. It doesn't sound terribly scientific, but for the reasons I've just tried to explain, this is one of the few things that we can realistically do.
Well, I think you're also pointing out the most important events in life are the non-deterministic ones, right? They're the case when the business lead says, yes, this is very low probability of event, but if it happens, we go out of business, an existential threat, right? And it's not just security threats, as David points out. There's a lot of quality dimensions there. I think we all are looking for those those events that go off the rails completely, that are existential.
I'm extremely happy that you don't talk about attacks for these kind of things. No one mentioned attack yet. Okay, we talk about security, but actually, because of this dependency, the more general question is if something goes wrong of the system. So there is a system failure, there is a human failure, there is a context failure, the life is unpredictable, dynamic. So if our systems do not follow what we are doing, and what do? Do we change them? Or we have this, in the previous talk of David about this adaptive systems, but they are costly, and most probably we cannot make this ideal system. So in general, how do we treat these unknown threats? Or vulnerability? We know there are certain we know there are vulnerabilities. Sometimes we don't know which type of vulnerabilities are there and what they are going. Who's going to exploit them?
Thank you so much for not saying known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. A little reference for some people out there to Donald Rumsfeld. I think the previous talk was exactly that's relevant here, and that there are unknown unknowns, and that we still want to be able to have our systems continue. I think that the difficulty, there are many difficulties, but one of the difficulties is figuring out how much we want to embed in the system itself and complicate the system and make it harder to understand, and how much we want to add on the outside. We also run something called the Consortium for IT Software Quality, which is developing standards, has published standards for measuring the quality of software in general. Some of those quality metrics are security related. For example, does the software do bounds checking? And it's amazing how many don't, by the way. It's the #1 security error. But there are a lot of other quality metrics that are not security related. That's why I think it's a more general issue. And there are some things you can do to make your systems more successful along many quality metrics, including security. But you're always going to want to have some supervisor on the outside that repairs systems that are broken.
So it's good that you mentioned standards. Actually, what will help us make the systems, type of design principles, or standards to follow, or specific tools? Slavo, you mentioned before some testing tools.
Before we jump into the standards, I'd like to expand a little bit on the previous point. I think there is a fundamental difference here between what we can do about legacy systems and how we can build new systems. And when dealing with the legacy system and trying to retrofit security with it, you inevitably deal with known unknowns. While when it comes to new development, in this case, by making sure you follow the correct process and that you apply the necessary security controls and the necessary points, you can all but eliminate known unknowns. And you can make sure that in all likelihood, your system will be as secure as it can realistically be. It's not really rocket science, and it's about following a meticulous process within the limits of time and funding you can get for it. But this is the way forward. It, of course, becomes a totally different story when you have to do something about a system that was developed without security in mind, and we have to deal with this all the time. And then the situation becomes pretty bad, and it's really difficult to achieve a satisfactory outcome. You can improve, but it can never be totally satisfactory. But with new development, simple things such as sticking to a secure development lifecycle can make a fundamental difference.
I think there are also some new architectural paradigms that are very important here. First of all, on the design side, normally when we build a system, we think we have to choose certain technologies, let's say our server technology or a database technology, and we'll pick one solution for that. A recent line of research and actual security measures is to pick many solutions and have them change dynamically so that the actual implementation of your server technology might be very different on different machines. Sometimes it's called moving target. The idea being that if you're trying to shoot someone and they're moving around the room, they're much harder to hit. And so if you create a system that's sort of dynamically changing and varying its infrastructure and other kinds of things, then you can make a system that's much more difficult for someone from the outside to attack. So that would be one kind of important architectural change, is rather than picking a single solution, you pick multiple solutions and allow those to change dynamically. Another architectural solution.
Would you like this? You have your slides on that. Are they illustrating this?
I could show that, yeah.
Yeah?
Okay.
Can you put the other presentation, please? Yeah. Hello? You hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
No.
It will come.
Yeah, so if this is sort of a typical, the picture in the middle, where you have a set of web servers, for example, you would pick one technology, but one possibility is to pick multiple technologies as a starting point, and then if you're a client, you don't know which of those web server technologies you're using, but you could even do more by changing those dynamically on the fly, so that even if you can figure out for a particular server at the moment, 5 minutes from now it may be a very different one. So this is a general principle that you can apply in many cases to systems in order to make it harder for an attacker to know what's going on. But these come at a cost. Obviously, using 3 technologies is more expensive, and there need to be runtime mechanisms for switching those. So, again, there's these trade-offs between things.
The amazing thing to me is that this is not new. It may be new for computer science, but it's been true for perimeter defense and defense in depth for centuries, right? For example, intelligent airport security doesn't check for the same stupid scissors every single time. It changes the check every day, so it's impossible for attackers to know what they should not be trying to carry through security. Intelligent security, of course, meaning not American airport security. And clever security schemes have been doing this for a very long time, and I want to bring it back to the more general issue that this is finally applying engineering discipline to software. These things have been known for a very long time. There's nothing new under the sun. And even the engineering balance of determining how much we're willing to pay, whether we want to have 3 different approaches to doing security at the perimeter or security in depth, and even though it's going to cost us something like 3 times as much to implement, might be important if we want to ensure that we don't get a nonlinear existential response that's going to destroy the organization.
I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate here and observe that the approach just described by David, there is an element of security through obscurity there. We're relying on the attack and not knowing what's going on inside. It's not terribly reliable, but every little helps. This is a practical discipline, and we have to be practical about this. And if this approach makes it less likely that an attack would succeed in reasonable time, then yes, of course, I'm all for it. But you have to realize that this is not really a fundamental solution. It's one of the many measures, many steps we can take.
I'm going to completely disagree. It is fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. And in fact, psychology research into exactly this, when you're talking about human attacks on human systems, have been around for over 100 years. The idea that the attacker doesn't know which defense is being used or which approach is being used, what it does is increase the cost for him as well as for you.
Psychologically, I would agree, yes, and it annoys him big time when he doesn't know what's going on, and it helps.
Yeah, I think we will get a second round after that, Richard and Slava. But one thing which is very important, or thank you, Richard, that you mentioned the ancient art of war or something like that, the rules of defense, which are not about software. They are nothing new about the
Of course they're about software. That's my point.
Yeah, it's
Sun Tzu didn't realize that. Sun Tzu didn't realize that, but it was about software.
And I remember something also very important from some of the smart people in the defense. They were saying that it's not defendable, something which is not designed to be defended. And I think this goes to the, David, maybe the points you just wanted.
Right. I mean, let's see. I think design is really important to get it right there. But one of the things we do know also is that you can't completely design it in. Back to the point earlier that there are going to be things where in fact, you don't. And I'll just refer to the kind of thing I was talking about in the previous lecture, where we can architect systems today that allow runtime flexibility so that we haven't wired in specific security defenses that can be defeated by analysis from an attacker, but we actually have kind of resilience that can respond to things that we didn't predict in the past. So I think, again, that's a sort of an architectural question. We have to build systems that allow that to occur, that allow us to plug in these mechanisms for dynamic adaptation to security. I want to mention one other thing, though, also on the previous slide I had. I think one of the features of today's modern systems is that we build many of our things on top of platforms and frameworks. We're not starting from scratch. And we have to rely, on the negative side, we often have to rely on the platform developer to have gotten it right. We're depending on certain capabilities. On the positive side, if someone designs the platform well, they can often eliminate large classes of problems simply by making it impossible to do, to shoot yourself in the foot as a developer building, let's say, a particular application. Some people have called this architecture hoisting, meaning putting into the architecture itself certain guarantees so that if you use the platform, you have no choice, for example, but to authenticate before you make a service call, for instance. And I think, again, this is sort of a design principle that we can use here in terms of how we think about building systems, making sure the infrastructure and the platforms we use have built-in guarantees.
Okay. Because also we were mentioning a bit about the standards. So there's one, you probably know about these secure coding principles and so on. Let's go a bit down to the technology side. So you have the secure coding principles. They go on the design architecture, so defense in depth and all these kind of principles. If we all follow the same recommendations or the same standards as developers, aren't we getting easier target to the bad guys? Because this is easy to, let's say, to break the rules which are known. already. So if we follow certain security standards or secure coding standards, isn't it actually easier for the bad guys to look at them and break them? If you stand a defense system?
If you're talking about a standard defense system, a standard perimeter defense, for example, absolutely. But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about a set of principles for making your systems more secure. Yes, I suppose it's true that if you found something in those principles that was in general created an opportunity for attack that no one had thought of by looking at all those principles, then I'd agree with you. But that's a pretty far-fetched idea. If we had exactly the same technical security, I mean, you and I have had this conversation many times, George, about the difference between principles of software development and actual software APIs, protocols, languages, and so forth. Those are very different things. If we were talking about the latter, then I'd say yes. If we all had exactly the same security interfaces, the same security protocols, languages, and so forth for every system, then we'd be creating opportunities. But when you're talking about principles for better software design, no, I actually think it's probably a good idea.
Completely agree with Richard on this one. Yes, on the one hand, you can argue that by publishing standards, you give attackers certain guidance, but this doesn't really go beyond just general education. Yes, an educated attacker is more dangerous, but they will gain this education from other sources, and a good attacker doesn't particularly have to be very educated. On the other hand, when correct principles are applied, it goes way beyond not having certain kinds of vulnerabilities. So the correct principles, they're not negative, they're positive. You do this, you do that, you do certain things. And just because the attacker knows that you do certain things doesn't necessarily make their lives that much easier. It's the famous principle which was declared by Turing: the enemy knows the system. Of course, that applied to cryptography, but to a large extent, it applies to IT security at large. You have to assume that the enemy knows the system, but your system should be good enough to withstand the fact that the enemy knows it. And it works in many respects when done properly.
That goes back actually to the open source idea. So if you publish everything, it's quite likely that the smart guys will find out the breaches or the threats in your code, and they help you heal the system before the bad guys catch it. And this is actually what we saw part of the OpenSSL point with the Heartbleed, which happened in April. And actually, well, I wanted to, because we move slowly to the attacker field, let's say, and the defense field. October was announced as European Cybersecurity Month or something like that. And we have very good gifts or presents, I would say, from our good friends, Microsoft, the most popular system. Let's say every day almost we get a 0 day, like started with Sandworm, and then like every day we have a new vulnerability discovered, and unfortunately these vulnerabilities go deep in the kernel.
So you're arguing that Microsoft should open source Windows? That's what it sounds like.
That's something they promised actually some time ago. No, the point is, well, apparently we live in a 0 day. Okay, so every day we get something new about these vulnerabilities, and the cure comes next day or a few days after. So this, the story is that this is a lost game, in fact. I mean, each time we want to protect against the known things, I mean, the antivirus and all this. Is there anybody from Kaspersky here? No? Okay. Well, I expect that you may comment later on that. But if we follow this trend, like, let's say we need at least one sample of this bad thing which happened. Sometimes we don't discover this for years and years and years, so we don't know if it was used or not used. You see, remember the flame and all the other stuff, flame virus. So we don't know actually if something was used and how we tackle with this game. So there is a new approach. It's, I don't know, like a few days ago it happened. Israeli company, SciActive, I believe it was called. They announced a new approach, and they got immediately investment by Siemens on that. A new approach. So they study the viruses, the code of viruses, and the attacking platforms, let's call it like that. It's not just one virus. And they try to predict what's next there. So in the attacker chain, because they claim like all the new viruses, they come 98% of the code used there is just reuse of the previous code. It's like Stuxnet or Flame. This became a generator of thousands of viruses, new viruses, the platforms. And the other 2%, they are just recycled code. So actually, it's just combination, integration of known things. So they try to get these lines of vulnerability, not of attackers, and try to predict what's next. But this is already at the edge of them to write the new attacks.
It just increases the cost of attacks.
Yeah,
and
most
actually this
probably.
all skirts
Is
the-
this a better approach, actually? I mean, it's the predictive, they call them like a malware prophet.
I wouldn't just say a better approach, it's another approach. Why would you limit yourself? I mean, it's certainly something else that you can do. I think we're all skirting the issue that the fact is the vast majority of attackers don't understand at all what they're doing. They're just downloading code and giving it a shot. That's, I think, our biggest problem. That plus the fact, I mean, you implied that, you know, after a patch for a 0-day comes out, that everybody applies it. In fact, nobody applies it statistically. So 0-day remain at large for a very long time for most people.
Yes, I think that looking into potential new threats or complex ways of attacking our systems, it may be exciting for us. It's research like scientific activity, and I would love to do more of that if I had time for this. But the reality is that the majority of successful attacks, they succeed because they exploit well-known things as trivial as SQL injection, for example. So by getting the basics right, we can protect our systems to a very large extent, and arguably doing this is more important than looking into advanced stuff, which also has to be done, but it's a matter of proportion.
Okay, now we move a bit to the more general subject. So we live in the connected world. So all the businesses are connected. And Slava, you mentioned security by obscurity. So if we think that we are too small, nobody's going to notice, like, for example, Bulgaria. It's a small country, and nobody's going to attack us. It's not true, because we are a member of EU, we are a member of all the international networks, and I believe it's for everybody like that. The small company usually is in a big supply chain, in a value chain, and all these value chains are digitally operated. So we talk about the shared risk, and actually there is no small and big open door. There is always open door. And sometimes we don't know how these attacks or how this even bad information, false information propagates over the chain. So can we deal, this already goes beyond the technical things. I mean, it goes mainly about the organizational principles. So how we can deal with this insecurity on the business side? Or I don't know, maybe you have experience with it.
This is a difficult matter, yes. People may be tempted into thinking they're small enough or insignificant enough. And obviously, Bulgaria as an example, well, you're not that obscure. It's not. But in many cases, it's possible to plausibly argue that we are obscure. In our case, it's different. EE, for which I work, is the biggest mobile network operator in the UK. So obviously, we are not obscure. On the other hand, we are operating in a competitive world, and there are other companies around us. And business can convincingly argue that we only have to be better protected than the next guy, and then the attacker will go elsewhere and will steal credit card numbers from one of our competitors, from O2 or Vodafone, because it will be easier than to steal this from us. And this is valid to some extent. And when it comes to making decisions how much to spend on security, this becomes a valid argument. On the other hand, as I keep telling them, when the day comes and if we have a major security breach, it's not really going to help us that much that we were in the first place more secure than the next guy. You have to achieve a certain level of security anyway. So these considerations have to be put into context of business needs and the cost to business. But as I mentioned earlier, numerical calculations are notoriously difficult because you keep dealing with low probability catastrophic events. So at the end of the day, business is the ultimate decision maker, and it comes to common sense, taking business risks based on sufficient information. And the role of security professionals is to make sure that business decision makers can make an informed decision on the basis of what you feed into the decision-making process, hopefully in layman's terms, which is why I use the metaphor of physical security of buildings so much, in order to explain how it works. So the way we protect our systems is not fundamentally different from the way you would protect your home. So do you need a lock on the front door? Because even with the lock, it's still possible to gain entrance. Do you invest into a fortified door, but there may be a guy who has dynamite and so on. So it's weighing these things against their costs and allowing business decision makers to come up with a sensible decision. I wish I could do better than that, but I'm not aware of any techniques that would really help.
But you can't, because I mean, as you say, I mean, it's exactly the same and as I mentioned before, it's exactly the same as physical security cases going back for centuries, right? And Sun Tzu was a great example, but I think the person who says it best is Bruce Schneier, who's constantly talking about the fact that there's only security. There isn't software security and physical security and hardware security and so forth. It's just measuring the security. And the issue you keep bringing up, which I think is really important, Slava, is that there are nonlinear outcomes, or what I was calling existential outcomes, in which the organization might completely go away, and you're willing to spend anything to avoid nonlinear outcomes. By the way, if you're going to tell the story about getting the attacker to go to the company down the street, you have to tell it the funny way, which is there's a bear running towards two guys in the forest, and one of them leans over to tie his shoes, and the second guy says to him, "That's not going to help you outrun the bear." And he says, I'm not trying to outrun the bear. I only have to outrun you.
Not be the last in the chain. It's in front of me. Okay. Then the issue actually is that we always go back to the risk analysis. to estimate the risk and what will be the cost of everything which happened, and then to balance between the prevention and the reaction after that. So a lot of, when we speak about software quality, for example, we always say, okay, well, prevention, early detection of any defect, the requirements or the defect in the coding and everything, the earlier you detect it, the better, so you can low-cost clean it by doing it. However, in the security and talking to the more general stuff like architectures or designing of the system, it's not always like that, most probably, because you can do a lot of investment in the prevention and yet be vulnerable to very little things. And maybe what is the balance between the, because we go to the last topic where we put in the discussion, is what is the cost of it?
I think I have to cross between what you're talking about, George, and what Slava was saying. A lot of what security, not just security experts, but software experts in general have to do with management is explain that there is a risk to software. Right? It's interesting that most management understands that, that there can be software failures because they've seen software failures and they've been affected by software failures, but they don't do the risk analysis to software systems that they would do to any other system that implements their businesses. And it's absolutely critical to understand that there are software risks. This just came from a conference that we're specifically discussing software risk and the importance of recognition of software risk to management. And in fact, you can lower the cost of discovery of software risks if you measure the software itself and not just the process used to develop the software. And as you know, those are the metrics that we are actually developing and standardizing.
So I'm wondering, for other areas, it seems like there's a much better general knowledge about trade-offs between cost and quality. If you take availability, for example, there's a lot of estimates. If you need so many nines in your system, or if you're going to add one more 9 to your system in terms of availability, how much is that going to cost you over and above the other one? And those are obviously rules of thumb, which will vary a lot depending on the context. But it seems like we don't really have that kind of metric or measurement or even back of the envelope ways of dealing with. Now, maybe people in the business who actually have to do this do in their heads, but I think one of the problems is it's not well communicated. That, for example, that there are a set of low-hanging fruit there, that you should do at least those at very low cost, and you'll, for example, avoid buffer overflows or SQL injections and so on. And that's easy to do. Now, if you want to actually also do some other class, it's going to cost you this much. I don't think we have, as a general industry, that kind of general widespread knowledge. I'm wondering, is that because we really don't have it, or because we have it and people just don't know about it?
So I know of some studies that are exactly, the way that you know that your availability goes up by another 9, as you put it, is experience, right? Experience of systems that have been built in various different ways. And there are actually studies of software quality and the cost of achieving quality and the resulting likely quality, not just on the security dimension, but on other dimensions as well. And I'd be happy to share the ones I've actually just seen at the CAST conference in Paris 2 weeks ago.
While this issue of cost-benefit analysis is hugely important, one thing that is probably almost trivial but not widely appreciated is that if you follow the correct process when you develop your software, and if you start from the very beginning and incorporate security from the beginning, from the requirements, not even from the design, then most of the fruit becomes low-hanging fruit. You can eliminate a lot of costs by doing things sufficiently early while it is still easy to fix any deficiencies. And this is very important because this helps to justify the spend on security, because not only you make your systems more secure this way, but you eliminate a lot of waste caused by the need to redo things later on, and this needs to be offset against the cost of security. And this way you can justify your existence and the kind of work you're doing much better, and this results in the better security of the systems overall, because you are able to do more work if you do it early enough.
But again, the problem is that the future cost is a statistical cost, right? It's probabilistic. And that's the difficulty explaining to management that you need to spend something now to avoid the probabilistic outcome in the future. And it is the classic engineering trade-off issue, right? And that's why we need upper management to understand the importance of software risk.
Oh, yes. And you stand a better chance of achieving something this way when you work for, say, for a German company for which I worked for years, where senior management tend to have a PhD in something like science or mathematics. It's much harder to do this in a British company where a lot of people, even doing practical software development, let alone in management positions, don't have a university degree. So you have to be flexible with the kind of explanations you give. And your example of outrunning a bear is much more useful in the UK than it would be in Germany, where you can talk about probabilistic outcomes and be understood.
Yeah. So let's say, to simplify the story, it's one thing. What you're mentioning about the investment or the earlier, or the prevention, the cost of prevention of the stuff is actually the easiest thing is we first should focus on closing the open doors before investing huge amount in securing the back door. Is that correct? So the basic errors, mistakes in the design or maintenance of the systems, like versions of all the other things, the update the versions and following the recent threats. This is closing the open doors. And then we invest really in a secure way, in a very sophisticated way. The other, just to link it also to what David mentioned about the statistics on availability. Remember that majority of the, or something what is mostly visible about the attacks is the denial of service type of attacks. So DOS or DDoS attacks, they really attack this. So this is one source of resource or service not available. So for this we have statistics, and maybe we can estimate the cost very easily. Unfortunately, we cannot, I mean, there is no efficient way against the DDoS yet. Okay, anyway, go. You wanted to say something.
Well, I wanted to agree that it's arguably more important to close the front door before taking care of the back door, but ideally you need to do both. It's a question of in what order, how you proportion your spend. But if you neglect the back door, then sooner or later the attacker will figure it out.
Becomes the front door.
Yeah. Okay, so we extend a bit because this is a software engineering conference, and we spoke a lot about the education. And what do we, how do we train our developers? So what kind of skills and competencies they should have in addition to the development, the coding, programming, so that they start assisting or caring about all what we are talking now. So is it only compliances, or is it just in the requirements specific security stuff, or there should be something in the mindset change?
If you don't mind me taking my turn again. This is a painful issue for me, and I have a very strong view on this. From beta experience, I would say that organizational and kind of soft skills are more important than technical skills in this respect. It's reasonably easy to get hold of developers who know what, my area is application security, so who know what application security is about, who know all the common threats, all the basic techniques of avoiding them. It's so much harder to get them to actually apply those techniques in the fashion required and to follow the process required. We keep hearing, they keep pushing back saying, I don't believe that this is actually a threat. I don't believe I have to take care of that, even although your standards tell me that I have to. And my usual reply is, let this not stop you, my friend. You still do this, and the beauty of our approach is it works. As long as you follow the rules, it works even if you don't believe in those rules. But it's awfully difficult to get people to follow this. I would prefer them to agree, to communicate, and to do this willingly. But even when they do this unwillingly, it works. But it's difficult to force software developers to follow the process, to follow the standards. And the better they are technically, the more likely they are to come up with strong opinions. And they may be very plausible, very convincing. And a lot of these questions, they don't have simple answers. So you cannot quite convince them by logical argument. It comes down to, here is the rule, you are an employee of the company. It's part of your job description to follow these rules. And this is a painful topic. It causes a lot of friction, but I think it's inevitable. Following the process is hugely important, and I would say more important than technical skills.
I completely agree. We're starting to agree on everything. It's kind of scary. Yeah, we started agreeing. There's two pieces there, and I think you quickly went over that it's easy to find people. I think it depends on where you're looking. It can be quite difficult to find people that actually have the training, not just in soft skills in general, but specifically understanding software development processes that give rise to better quality software. And then the second part I think is critically important, is that incenting them to follow those rules. You gave one incentive, which is it's your job to do it. I think a stronger incentive is if you don't do it, then you no longer have a job.
Well, that's an implication, but in real life you don't state it openly.
That's not the implication in France.
Since George brought up education, I should probably say a couple words about that. I think there are many kinds of education. One is for the programmers, so the technical skills, but I think there are many other kinds of important educational opportunities here. A couple years ago, the Navy, U.S. Navy, came to us and said, security is becoming very important to us. We have officers who really don't understand it. They don't know how to make good decisions. They don't know how to invest in technology. And we need something not to get them to be operators of our systems or program them, but to be part of the whole ecosystem of security where they're contributing at the level of decision makers. And so we set up a master's degree program for them, which was somewhat innovative in what goes into it. There are basically 4 sections. There's a security section, as you might guess, but there's also systems engineering, architecture, and networks, that kind of thing. And then there's analytics and big data. So how do you actually analyze the data to determine what's going on from a security perspective? And then finally, an area called decision sciences. So there's actually, a lot of body of work about how do you make good decisions? How do you avoid biases, human biases, in the decision-making process? And so it's come up with a very interesting kind of degree, again, for sort of mid-level, what they think of as sort of mid-level officers, people who are going to be in the decision-making process, both about technology investment, but also maybe on the fly about kind of security responses. And so I think when we look at education, we have to look at a much bigger picture even than the systems developers.
That's correct. What we were saying about the new e-leaders in the digital ecosystems or in the digital economy, so people from the business viewpoint, because they designed the new business based on the digital principles. And actually they design it like a software enterprise. The new business is designed like this. It's not designed because of the only business principles. So we have to extend this education of the business people, and there is right now in Europe all the business schools actually they introduce not just security. They introduce this more general topic about the resilience of the business. I mean, how reliable the business, how the new design of the business will work in the digital ecosystem.
I hate to repeat myself, especially compared to the conference in Sofia, not just a few months ago. But this is not new. This is my problem with the phrase e-leader, because e-leader is just a leader. And the risk you're talking about is just a new kind of risk. It's not even that new. Software has been around for 75 years. Well, depending on how you count. If you count to Ada Lovelace, it's even longer. And it's just another risk, and it's a risk that can be measured. It's a risk that can be statistically projected. It's a risk that can be collected. You can find out information from the real world about what the risks are, and it's a risk that can be managed. And it should be managed like any other risk, whether that's product risk or marketing risk or market risk or quality risk or manufacturing risk or any other risk that management has to deal with. That's why I think it's just leaders we're looking for, not e-leaders.
I think we have a couple of minutes left. It's good to open the floor. 5 minutes. Yeah, I see it here. 8, but anyway, we get 5. Extra 3. Yeah, 3 bonus. I think it's good to open the floor. Any questions, challenges, disagreements, agreements? Come on, guys. Okay.
Thanks for very interesting discussion. I'd like to ask you this. Would you agree that insecurity is a very useful thing? It creates markets. It allows you to construct standards, to issue reports, to meet here and speak to each other. Well, it gives food to a lot of people. And to be sincere, I do not see any motivation to stop this good thing. Well.
So I'll give you the first answer. Are you sure you're not with Kaspersky? Yeah, the other guy is, yeah, in the yellow shirt, yeah. The answer is no, it's not a good thing. Trust me, at least I have many other things that I could be doing with my time. And in fact, as I keep mentioning, there are risks other than security risks, and there are quality metrics other than security metrics. In fact, there are many more metrics than just security metrics. So I think we all have other things that we could be doing if we weren't wasting time on this.
I'm sure you have a lot of things to do with your time, but I'm not so sure Kaspersky is the same.
No, apparently it's a challenge for our friends from Kaspersky. So you have any? You must answer.
Hello. So what do you think? Is that security problems are artificial because of, for example, we create new devices, we explore new technologies, so that's new became that's require a new security levels, security technologies. So we create new and we create a problem for this one.
That's clear. Well, it was the last topic actually of the panel. We didn't touch at all. How about the new challenges? So we have the mobile devices, Internet of Things. We have devices which are less secure because they're less powerful, at least, or we didn't put enough standards or requirements to them. If you remember, like January, there was, I think January, it was the first botnet attack where the smart refrigerator was used, exploited there. And we are going to have our cars, well, definitely our smartphones or smart TVs and all the other devices in the botnet attacks, embedded or engaged. So this goes back to the dependency, actually, we have. So how critical for us is and how we care about this security. It's more general. It's not just about security and the bad guys. Maybe.
Well, as far as new things and new threats, because we're doing new things, are concerned, to an extent this is natural. You keep expanding the frontiers, the perimeter becomes longer and it naturally becomes more susceptible to attack. On the other hand, if you expand the frontiers in a clever way and if you apply the good old-fashioned principles, it doesn't have to be this way. I think much of the problem mentioned here is rooted in the fact that new technologies and new approaches are not necessarily well thought through. And we could do better than that and make our life easier by incorporating good principles, including good security principles, into new platforms and new solutions as we design them. This is not currently the case as far as the practice of software engineering is concerned. A lot of things are overlooked, and the problem is, to a large extent, self-inflicted.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'll give a very specific example in case people didn't understand what was essentially an abstract point that Slava just made. There's a great example of the first successful attack on automobile's controller through the tire pressure sensors. I'm not going to mention which vendor it was. I think it was based in Munich, but they put Bluetooth tire pressure sensors in the tires, and rather than sense tire pressure only from those Bluetooth sensors, when they bridged it to, they just bridged the Bluetooth directly to CAN bus. So if you could break Bluetooth, which sometimes takes 10 minutes, you could control the car's acceleration and steering and braking and trivial things like that. This was a not very clever extension of the security perimeter of the automobile. They could have done a much better job. They could have avoided, they obviously have to extend the security perimeter a little bit, but if they extended it only to tire pressure sensing and not to any Bluetooth broadcaster within 10 meters of the car, it probably would have had fewer problems.
I'm afraid we have a lot of examples like this. I mean, it's a long time ago that was about the pacemakers, and there are still people with the pacemakers which are not protected against this access, or there are some satellites which are vulnerable to that. But anyway, so...
No, that's the Bulgaria issue. Nobody's going to attack that.
Okay. Obscurity. Okay, there is a challenge to Kaspersky.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Have to
I can assure everyone in this room that Eugene Kaspersky and his team have a lot of things to do in their free time, so except for earning money on security issues. I have just one notice about this conference in general, on this panel. One of the trends that I've noticed in this year at the conference is that is the technical debt, which so a lot of people were speaking about this. And one terrible thing is that when a team are developing software, security is security is kind of invisible thing. It is always, you have always this chance to leave it out and say let's do it later. And the terrible thing is that often this technical debt consists of or contains a lot of security issues, which, as we all know, often leaves unsolved. And I think that concerning this point, it's very important to not only deal with technical debt, but also to deal specifically with technical security debt, which may be quite much more, which can have much more effect on the system in future. Thank you.
Okay.
So one of the things that I think, again, going back to an earlier point, that we can't just think about the software. This sort of works in an ecosystem where there are a lot of people involved. And I think a lot of the problems actually involve not, users, not just the systems themselves. We actually, compromising passwords and so on is typically a social thing as much as a technical thing. And I think that as more and more people use things, the more vulnerabilities there are because they don't understand their needs in terms of what they have to do.
Yeah, we go back to the issue of low awareness of the users, and especially not so much conscious about this dependency, what we have, and the cost of the breaches. So people, they just neglect this. But anyway, okay, that's the topic maybe for next year, what to do with the users. Any other urgent questions for the rapid reaction team or something like that? Yeah, in 10 seconds. Okay.
I had a little bit of a global question, but it will be quick. Humanity has developed a way to prevent crime. Just I can go to the street and I won't be killed, murdered anyway. And you all are computer scientists, you're Mad Maxes, Navy SEALs, so you love to protect, you can protect yourself. But smaller companies, they cannot. But we all spend money, every company must spend money on security. But I don't have to spend money on my personal security. Do you see any progress and awareness of the governments that it's very easy to fix the issue? Because we had a porno demonstrated on advertisement on the Tversky street, and in 4 days the guy was jailed. So no problem, nobody ever tried to do that.
Oh, Number one, the answer is no, because it's every link in the chain is an opportunity. And number two, if you think you're not spending to support the local police wherever you live, you're wrong.
No, the point is very sensitive. Actually, it's considered like the small business, and there's a specific topic, I believe, in Europe on that. The small business is a big threat to the security. Digital, okay, because it's a lower awareness and this dependency, the digital dependency and the value chains, and the risk propagates, and actually you don't see. The shared risk is there, and this security by obscurity doesn't work. There is no small. Every little gap is already a big breach or potential stuff. So that's the story. There is some. Unfortunately, there are not that many regulations or other measures, so the only way it could work, the same with the end users actually, is by stimulating them, for the moment, some incentives to do it.
Quick point on this as well. If I understood the question correctly, you mean some kind of collective protection measures, like you do pay, you obviously realize that you do pay for your local police through taxes, so you would want to have a similar setup for security and software. To an extent, this is happening already. There are shared standards. PCI DSS would be one example, which is imposed on any company which can accept payment by credit card. It's not something a particular company designed. It started this way, so there were opinions on the part of Visa, American Express, Diners Club. Then they came together and they developed a shared standard that now every merchant has to follow. So to some extent, this collective, sensible approach is emerging slowly, but we're very far from getting to the level comparable with paying for police through our taxes. We're not there yet.
Yeah, and the point is that your personal security, you are actually directly paying some of your personal security as well. You probably close the door of your home when you go to sleep. You might even lock the door of your home. That's a cost of personal security. Well, you don't, okay. Could you tell me where you live, please, and where you keep the silver? No.
The lock is just to make people don't make them, don't violate the law. But you can easily break into any door. Just in America, all of them wouldn't.
My point is,
you can easily kill someone, killed man, but you don't do it because we'll be, in jail for forever.
I don't do it, but people do it. Actually, there are murders, and I'm sorry to tell you. The fact is, we do pay some through our taxes for protection, and we do some things to protect ourselves, and that has to be true for software as well. There's no difference.
Okay.
I think it's a topic for cybercrime or cybersecurity specific conference, or really with the other people like law enforcement and the other, to comment on that, or the judges or whatever. So here we just deal with the previous part, or the engineering part, because we are a software engineering conference. So I think we should close this panel and leave a couple of topics maybe for next year, and the talks after that at lunchtime or at the party. So I believe everybody feels safer now in their business, not in what they're doing, and it's not in their life maybe. For this we have to talk next year. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Don't forget to it's not about your evaluations, put your comments or put your questions or recommendations in